Hi guys, I have to move, so we're doing an unhaul. So yeah, I regularly try to kind of purge my book collection, but where we are moving soon, I'm trying to downsize a little bit more, so this one feels a little extra painful, but I'm trying to be realistic and I'm trying to minimize the amount of book boxes that I'm going to have to lug around. So we're just gonna dive right in. This is in no particular order. I just had these in a couple big tote bags and dumped them all on the table. So I'm just gonna be picking them up and throwing them around. First up, this omnibus edition of the Inheritance trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. I got this for 50 cents like 3 years ago, and I basically just keep moving it around from shelf to shelf because this is intimidating and I just don't think I'm gonna get to it anytime soon. I don't particularly like omnibus editions because it, like, really the spine gets gross. It just stresses me out to look at. So I think if I do pick up this series, I'm gonna try to find it more like divided, or maybe even the ebook edition. I don't know, but this is just taking up an incredible amount of room on my TBR shelf at the moment, and I just, again, try to be realistic with myself, so it's going. Staying on the N.K. Jemisin train, unfortunately, I'm going to be getting rid of the fifth season and the Obelisk Gate. This is an incredible series, but I am just not the type of person that reaches for dystopian. Just right now, this series is a little too bleak for me. I do recognize that N.K. Jemisin is a master of her craft, and I do want to continue to read her stuff, but I just don't think I have the fortitude to continue this series. The first book was really good. It blew my mind, but I just haven't wanted to reach for the second book in like the 2 or so years that I've owned it, and I just don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. Like I said, I haven't really been in the mental headspace to read a lot of dystopian stuff. So I'm hoping someone who wants to jump into N.K. Jemisin finds these used at my local bookstore and is excited about the find. Next up, we have Pachinko by Min-Jin Lee. I read this, I believe, last year as a buddy read with my friend Stephanie, and it was really good, but I just don't see myself revisiting this because it really, it made me very sad. This is a tragic story, and it's a very heavy read, so I feel like I learned a lot from this, and I'm really glad that I read it, but I think if I ever do want to revisit this story, I'd like to check out the miniseries. That looked to be like a really good adaptation. I feel like I've heard good things, so I don't, this was a really hard read. This is a really pretty edition. This is the UK edition I got from Book Depository, RIP. I don't feel like super attached to it either for like nostalgic reasons or anything, so I'm gonna let this one go. Another UK edition, actually, but hardcover, is Circe by Madeline Miller. This is not like a first edition, it's like a shortlisted Women's Prize edition. I don't know. UK editions go out of hardcover print very quickly. I was surprised that I found a hardcover one of this on Book Depository, but I love Song of Achilles, but Circe just did not do it for me. I thought it was super boring, and the pacing was really slow, and Circe just as a main character wasn't super compelling to me, so while I will keep Song of Achilles, I think forever, this one I'm not attached to. The writing is good, but like nothing stuck out to me the same way that the prose in Song of Achilles does. This didn't do a lot for me. I think I gave it a 3-star rating, so I just don't think it's worth holding on to, and hopefully, again, someone is excited to find the UK cover, because I do think it's rather beautiful. That's why I sought out this one, but trying not to keep books just because they're pretty. Then we have The Magician's Daughter by H.G. Perry. This is actually a pretty recent purchase, which makes me kind of sad. I think I read this in like March or April, and I just think it's a little forgettable. It was a fine read. I think I gave it 3 stars, but I think I'm gonna quickly forget about it, and I wanted it to be a little bit more whimsical and enchanting than it was. I liked how the magic worked in this world. I thought that was really cool. But again, I just wanted this to have a lot more atmosphere than it ended up having, and I think it could have been more, so I think I was mostly left disappointed because it didn't match my own sort of hype for it, and yeah, I don't know. Then I have volumes 1 and 2 of Romantic Killer, which is a full-color manga, which are kind of rare. This is a fun series. It follows a teenage girl who really loves video games, really loves sweets, and she really loves her cat. And then one day, all of those things are taken away from her by a magical being so that she can find love. And she gets put in a lot of really ridiculous, sort of stereotypical, tropey moments with some guys that go to her school or like are in her life in some way that she's never really paid attention to before. But she doesn't want to find love. She's perfectly content with her life as it is. So she's doing everything she can to actively resist this magical being's sort of mischievousness. This is a fun series, but they're kind of expensive. They've been like $15 or $16 a pop, and I think there's only actually 2 more, but I'm not like super interested in collecting them all, and I think I'll probably just watch the anime that's on Netflix for this. Again, it's a fun story, but it's also like not that deep, so I didn't feel like I needed this in my collection. Then I have Warrior of the Wild by Trisha Levenseller. This is a standalone YA fantasy that was quite cute, but ultimately it was only like a 3.5-star read for me. It's Norse inspired. We follow a main character that in her coming of age ceremony sort of gets betrayed and ends up failing and is cast out into the wilderness, which is a very dangerous place for people to live. There's monsters, and she's tasked with basically an impossible mission in order to redeem her honor. It was a very cute story. I liked the setting. The main character didn't do like a whole lot for me, but like she wasn't actively bad. I also wasn't super attached to the main sort of romance as a result, so that didn't do a lot for me either, but I did really like the magic system in this world, or like how that worked. I thought was super creative. So while I didn't love this story, I think it's definitely worth reading, and I picked this up used, so hopefully someone else finds it used as well and really enjoys it. I do like the fact that she writes a lot of standalone fantasies. They make for very fast reads and kind of like good palate cleansers, so I hope this finds its way to a good home. Next up, we have a couple books that I haven't actually read yet, but they've been sitting on my TBR for a really long time, and I just don't think I'm gonna get to them. First up is Evie Wyld's The Bass Rock. I'm not sure if they're talking about the fish or not. I'm gonna say Rock. I think this has to do like with a multi-generational thing. I'm not sure how these lives all weave together, but one storyline takes place in the 1700s, one takes place right after the Second World War, and then 6 decades later as well. So family saga stories and like kind of cross timeline stories are a little hit or miss for me. I have read a book by this author before, which is why I picked this one up in the first place. I think I got it for like $2 at my local bookstore, but I haven't really felt the need to pick this up, and I just don't know when I'm going to, so I'm gonna pass it on. Then we have The Plot by Jean Hanff Korelitz. I've heard pretty good things about this, like when it came out, but like since then, I feel like the reviews have been kind of mixed. This follows a college professor who has wanted to write a book for a really long time, but hasn't really had anything kind of come together or get picked up. And then one day his student tells him, his student who is like otherwise not a very brilliant person or like feels kind of like wasted potential, has the idea for an incredible story, and I think the student dies and the college professor takes that idea and like writes his own novel and it gets published, I think. So he ends up being really successful, and then he gets an anonymous email accusing him of being a thief. So I just read a book kind of similar to this, Yellowface, and I'm just not in the mood to read another one. I have a hard time with unlikable main characters sometimes, or when someone does something so morally reprehensible, it's hard to feel like invested in their story. I think paired with the fact that like the reviews that I've seen for this have been kind of meh, and like the fact that I'm not like huge on thrillers, I'm going to pass this along because I've just held it on to it for too long, and I feel no inclination to pick it up. These next 2 are Book of the Month editions that I actually picked up for like 50 cents each at my local bookstore quite some time ago. And again, I just don't think I'm going to get to them anytime soon. And where I spent $1 on them, I'm not going to worry about it. The first one's Arsenic and Adobo by Mia P. Manansala. I've heard really mixed things about this. It does seem cute, and I've heard the representation for like I believe it's Filipino culture is pretty strong. But I also have heard that the diabetic representation is kind of messed up. So I'm not really feeling strongly about this one way or another. I do like the occasional cozy mystery, but it's not like a favorite genre of mine. So I'm just gonna let this one pass. And then last summer at the Golden Hotel, I picked up because it gave me Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, like, I think season 2 vibes. And I just haven't really thought about it since. Like, I was surprised to find it under a stack of books that I have. But it takes place in the Catskills. I believe it's a historical fiction, but, like, the hotel's kind of on the decline. But I don't know. I don't care anymore. It does seem cute. Maybe I'll read it eventually, but it does seem like a good summer read, I suppose. But yeah, just haven't really been in the mood. We have a nonfiction, which I don't really read a ton of, and it is We Keep the Dead Close by Becky Cooper. It follows a true crime kind of story about a murder that happened at Harvard and how I believe like the investigation just didn't really go anywhere for a really long time. I picked this up on a whim. I found it used. And I kind of went through like a true crime phase a few years ago, but I'm just not as into it anymore. I do like nonfiction that deals more with like historical things, and I think that's kind of why I was looking into this one. But I've also heard really mixed things about the level of research that was done on this book, so I don't know, I'm just not feeling very compelled. And a lot of the times I tend to reach for audiobooks for nonfiction, so I just don't think I'm going to even physically read this one if I do ever get around to it. Few more book of the month editions that I did not get around to or I found used. I'm not like actively trying to purge book of the month editions from my collection, but I have spoken about it before. They're cheap, they're cheaply made, they're not really like collection or like collector worthy. If collecting hardcovers is a thing that you're interested in doing, they don't count as first editions. So if I have a book that I love, I'm probably going to try to replace it with a non-book of the month edition. I'm not getting rid of them all just for the sake of it, but these books also I have lost interest in since I first purchased them. So first up is A Flicker in the Dark by Stacey Willingham. This is a thriller, which is not a genre I typically reach for. I think this is like the main character's dad was arrested for being a serial killer, and then similar killings start happening again, but like her dad's in jail. So I don't really know much beyond that. I have seen good things about this author and this book in particular, but just not feeling it, and I've seen mixed reviews. So I noticed that I'm much more invested in thrillers when they're more like in combination with genre fiction, like sci-fi or fantasy. So where it's just a straight up thriller, I'm just not super excited about it anymore. Then we have Damnation Spring by Ash Davidson. This is like lit fic, ecological fiction, and I think this takes place in the 70s. And it has to do with like logging and conservation and like herbicides poisoning, I think the water or something. I'm not sure. I feel like a little bit of a broken record here, but I don't read lit fic a lot, and if I do, it has to be about something that I'm like super interested in. Not that I'm not interested in the environment, but this kind of seems like a bummer, and I'm just feel no inclination to read it. I do really like the cover, which is why I think I got it in the first place. But my reading habits have changed a bit since I picked this up initially, so I'm gonna let it go. Then I think I got this one for free, actually, for either my birthday or I had to credit it or something, I don't remember. And that is Small Angels by Lauren Owen. I have seen nothing but horrible reviews for this, which is a darn shame because the cover is really pretty and it seems to have like kind of gothic vibes, which is something that I'm typically very interested in. But like, again, literally, I have not seen a single good review for this book. So my excitement for it was quickly shot down. So yeah, I don't know, not even gonna bother, I'm just gonna pass it on. I spent literally zero money on this, so I'm not gonna feel guilty about it. Ooh, next up we have a DNF. I've had this book for a really long time. Finally tried to read it a few months ago. Got like 150 pages in and I just couldn't do it anymore. And that is Wicked Fox by Cat Cho. This story follows a teenage fox demon, and she has to move schools a lot because she has literally like feeds off of the energy of men, and her mom can't stay in a place too long for fear of being caught. So she transfers to a new school and is almost immediately seen feeding on a man by a classmate of hers. It feels like a really good setup. I was really into it. It kind of makes me think of like a manga or an anime, and I think it would work, like the story would work really well as one, but I didn't care for the prose much at all. It felt super flat. I don't know, I was just bored, and I don't think the setup should have been boring, so I felt kind of let down by it, and I just didn't feel like pushing through anymore. So, no idea if it gets better or how it ends. I do know there's like a sequel, but I don't see a lot of people talk about the sequel, so I don't know if it's like a soft one or what, but I've just had this book too long, and where it didn't capture my interest right away, I was quickly over it. I think this might have been my first book of the month book, actually, in like 2020. We have Frederick Bachman's Anxious People. Yeah, this is the September 2020 pick. I think that was my first one. This was a good book. I gave it 5 stars, actually, at the time. I don't know if I'd give it 5 stars today, though. I do fondly remember my reading experience of this, but I have also never felt like that's a book that I would love to reread, you know? I'm not, like, super attached to Frederick Bachman as an author, either. Like, I've never felt another, like, or an inclination to pick up another one of his books. He's got one series that I know has to do with, like, a small town and their hockey team, and some sort of, like, horrible thing happens. No interest in that. What's the one with the really long name? Every day the way home gets longer and longer or something. Seems like trauma porn. A Man Called Ove seems to be, like, about a super grumpy dude. Really not much interest. I don't know. I wish I was more interested in him as an author, but, like, so far this feels like the only book that has ever mildly intrigued me by him, and again, I just don't think I'm going to reread it, so I'm going to pass it along. It's a book of the month edition. Again, I'm not super attached to it, so I'm going to let it go, and maybe someone who needs to find it will find it, because it did really touch me at the time. Next up, we have The Witch's Heart by Genevieve Gornichek. This is a Norse mythology-inspired story. It follows one of Loki's wives, Angerboda, who is also known as the Mother of Monsters, sort of the events preceding Ragnarok, but, like, from Angerboda's perspective, which is, you know, something that's been kind of looked over in Norse mythology. It's compared a lot to Circe, so maybe that's why I was kind of like, this was fine, but, like, didn't do a whole lot for me. In particular, I do like mythology, and I liked the expanded sort of perspective that we got on Norse stories in this one, which is something I'm not quite as familiar with as I am with, like, Greek stories. But I don't know, it was fine. I enjoyed the journey while I was reading it, but I didn't feel, like, super strongly connected to it, and I think, like, a lot of people who love this story really connect with Angerboda. I may not have been, like, the totally right audience for this one either, so there's also that. So I do think this cover's gorgeous. And I would read other books by Genevieve Gornichek. It's just, this one in particular was fine, but I'm not in love with it. So we're purging the collection today, guys. I think I picked this one up in 2020 or 2021 as well, and that is Practical Magic by Alice Hoffman. I love the movie. I've seen it a lot through growing up. I rewatched it a few years ago, and it was still, like, the nostalgia fest that I remembered it being, but the book didn't really do a whole lot for me. I didn't care for the way that it was written. Like, Alice Hoffman's prose just felt really disconnected, and it didn't really have the same charm that the movie did, which I've actually seen as, like, a comment about the books a lot, is that, like, the movie's actually better, at least in regards to the sisterly relationship. So, like, I'm glad I read it, because, like, I love the movie so much, and it's fun to see kind of where that story started, but I'm not feeling particularly attached to the book version. I do want to read, I think there's a couple other books that are in this series that follow the main characters' like ancestors, but this particular story didn't do it for me, so letting it go. Then we have Once There Were Wolves by Charlotte McConaughey. This follows a ecologist who studies wolves in particular and tries to reintroduce them into the wild in areas where they've been hunted to extinction to, like, try to help the local climate kind of come back from the verge of, like, you know, disaster. And there's also, like, kind of a thriller element happening in this as well. So it was an interesting combination of story types, and I was definitely intrigued as I read it. I will say there was, like, kind of trigger warnings that I feel like nobody talks about in this book, involving sexual assault and also, like, really traumatic childbirth. So that's not for everybody. It definitely freaked me out. But yeah, this is a good story. I feel like I've said this a lot. I'm not feeling super attached to it. I enjoyed it at the time, but I don't think I'll ever want to revisit it for some of those reasons. Again, book of the month edition, trying to kind of get rid of these a little bit, but yeah, so not a bad book. I think I gave it 4 stars, but letting it go. This is a book that I was really excited about, and it's not bad, but it wasn't quite what I wanted it to be, and that is The Book Eaters by Sun Yi Dean. This follows a group of people who, for some reason, subsist off of books. Different genres have different flavors, and there's an even smaller subsection of these people that, rather than books, they eat brains, essentially. There's this very underlying, like, horror element happening in this book, and, like, alongside the fantasy, and I don't know, it wasn't what I thought it was gonna be. And I don't think that's a bad thing, but I just think, like, it didn't meet my expectations, I ended up being a little disappointed by it. I kind of wish it had committed to the horror element. It was a really cool idea, but it felt like only slightly touched upon. There was a lot of things that I don't think had the necessary closure that I wanted. So, I don't know, especially where this is a standalone, I was left wanting by the end, and I don't know, I was super excited when this came out, but it was only okay. I gave it 3 stars. I think this is the last book that I have in my collection that I'm getting rid of that I haven't actually read yet, and that is Stina Likes Persephone Station. I've also had this for a really long time. I do really love the cover. It was definitely a cover buy for me. And I have read this author before. I read Loki's Ring recently as an ARC. It was fine, but it didn't do a whole lot for me, like sci-fi wise. I'm only kind of just starting to really get into it this year. And that one left me very confused with just like the narrative structure. And I haven't seen very good reviews for this one either. So I think I'm gonna let this one go because there's a lot more sci-fi out there that I'm more excited about, and I've heard specifically that like the world building in this one is kind of disappointing. So I've noticed that like I need to feel very strongly connected to the world in which like these sci-fi stories take place, and if that's a weak point for this one, I just don't know if it's gonna work for me. So yeah, letting this one go, which is a shame because it is so pretty, but we're not holding on to books anymore just because they're pretty. And then this next set, which is the last chunk, is all books that I've read quite recently that I'm going to be getting rid of. A couple of these are going to go up on my Macari, so if you like special editions especially, keep an eye out for them. First up, we have 7 Faceless Saints by M.K. Lobb. This was fine. This one, actually, I'm going to talk about it with another one. Hold on. The Curse of Saints. Lots of saint action happening. So these two are both pretty recent Fairy Loot picks. One is very small and one is very chunky. But I don't know, to me they felt just kind of generic, unfortunately. They both deal with like deriving power from their saints, and like there's different like groups of people with different powers based on their saint. This one has a murder mystery. This one, it was so bland, I forget what the main tension in this one was. But yeah, neither of these just did very much for me, unfortunately, and I'm not going to be continuing either series, which is a shame because they're both really pretty. This one especially, I think, is a very gorgeous special edition, but I didn't care for them, so I'm getting rid of them. And then I have Shanghai Immortal by A.Y. Chow. I actually liked this book a bit better, but I didn't like it enough to commit to buying the special editions. And I think if I do continue the series, I'll probably just borrow the next one from the library. This first book was a little choppy for me. It takes place in 1920s Shanghai, and I wanted it to feel like super embedded in that era, and it just didn't. The main character was also very childish despite being almost 100 years old, but the author, I think, brought up a couple threads there right at the end that I was like, oh. So I think I'm going to continue it, even though this wasn't my favorite. I didn't hate it, and I think the series has potential. So I'm going to keep an eye out for the sequel, but I don't think I'm going to hold on to the special edition anymore. And then the last couple, I have Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmis. This is a first edition, first printing, so I might put this up on my Macari. I don't know if it's actually worth anything yet, or maybe it will be in the future. It's a pretty big book. This was fine. It's just not like a genre that I particularly like super love. When I finished it, I was like, that was good, but like I very quickly moved on. So it's not a story that's like lingered with me, so I don't think it's really worth keeping. I do think you know, this is a popular book for a reason. I'm curious to check out the miniseries adaptation with Brie Larson, but as a book, it was fine. I'm not gonna reread it, so I'm gonna let it go. And then finally, I have Last Night at the Telegraph Club by Melinda Lowe. I also read this last month, and I actually gave it like 3.5, 4 stars. It was quite good. I liked the main story. There were some weird kind of interrupting chapters that I didn't really get the point of. But yeah, I also don't read like a lot of YA outside of fantasy sci-fi. While I don't think this is bad by any means, I don't want to keep it in the collection, I guess. This is a story I think that will serve a lot of other people better than me, or like they'll gain something from it more than I did. I thought it was a beautifully told story, but I don't know, it's just not feeling super attached to it either, as it is with the rest of these books. So that's it. I tried to go kind of fast, so I apologize if this felt rushed. I was a little overwhelmed by the sheer amount of books that are sitting on the table right now. I don't think this is my biggest unhaul, and I think I probably still have a few more books to purge before I move, but this helps ease my anxiety a little bit. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you've read any of these books and would like to discuss them, please let me know. I'd love to engage in conversation about them. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and feel free to follow my channel or like this video, all that jazz, and as always, have a good day.